The Zerve application is open source. You can take it, you can copy it, and then it becomes yours. This is a content management system. So you might have heard of a content management system. So why is Zerve different from basically everything else out there? Hello world! My name is Eric Vicente, and these are the Zerve keynotes. In this video, I'm going to explain what Zerve is and how it can help you build apps today. So the vision is for app creation to be accessible to everyone. Now, that's a big vision, it's a big project, so I need to think about first who is Zerve for in the short term. And my goal right now is to help teams who are already building apps. So Zerve is a tool for app creators. And to understand how we can help app creators, let's take a look into the existing workflow of an app. So the app development workflow probably looks something like this. You've got some sort of engineer with their laptop. Usually we're a lot friendlier and we're not such a little gremlin. We're quite friendly people, but it's a slow process. It can be pretty painful as an engineer to have to build an application, especially if it needs to work on a lot of different platforms. In order to get your application out there, it needs to be built and deployed using a variety of different tools, depending on if it's going to apps or the websites, or probably both. But the developers in your organization are also kind of a bottleneck because you've got business people who need to affect the app, and you've got designers who are also trying to make changes in the application all the time. And usually they need to ask the developer to make those changes so that your app can be built and deployed again. Now, developers are, of course, kind of a bottleneck because we're kind of expensive, and most importantly, when all these little content changes are coming in, our time is being wasted. So we need to rethink about how changes kind of flow into your application. With a simple little modification to your application, developers can attach your app to a Zerve server so that it can get content updates from the server. Then your developer will go in and add the schema that your application needs, depending on what sort of data that your application will be consuming from the Zerve server. And in return for inputting the schema, Zerve will give your codebase type safety. At that point, your developer can go and redeploy the application like normal, and then enjoy really easy configuration updates. So the developer can just go into the Zerve app and make little changes, and those will flow into the application, so the developer doesn't always have to go through the build and deployment process. But then again, once Zerve is connected to your application, you've fixed a lot of the bottleneck in your organization, because now executives can go and make changes in the application depending on what the developers are enabling, and your designers can go in and also reconfigure things. Maybe changing colors, maybe changing the configuration of different layouts, or maybe just changing the different text strings that appear in the application. So yeah, that's how Zerve fits into your existing workflow. And that's how Zerve helps app creators own the content and configuration of their application by providing a more streamlined process to update the content rather than going through the deployment workflow. Really, everyone in the organization should love a tool like this because it helps the business people, it helps the designers, and it also helps the developers waste less time. Now, this is a content management system. So you might have heard of a content management system. So why is Zerve different from basically everything else out there? Really what makes Zerve unique as a CMS? And to understand that, you need to understand how Zerve works, but also how other applications work. And the way Zerve works is there's a service running in the back end that's managing the data. It's got the database inside of it, and it has an API that you can access from the web front end. So this, in the case of Zerve, it's a Next.js app that talks to the API. But then you also want to have native apps in the App Store. So that's why you've got mobile apps. And they can also talk to the exact same API. Now, all of these different services and components, they're not exactly standalone. They have components inside of them that can be broken out, shared separately, and even used across other aspects of the program. So inside of the web app, you're also using aspects of the database, so you want to reuse bits of code that you also have in your API. And same on your mobile app. You want to be able to share code with the web app. So this is how basically every app works, not just Zerve, if it has a website and also an app. Now, to understand why Zerve is unique, let's take a look at how companies typically approach open source. So a typical company will have another similar application with an API service, a web front end, and a mobile app. And as they're building the application, often components will emerge in each of these pieces. And then it's possible to take those components, clean them up, publish them on GitHub, write documentation, and then open source them. And this is how open source is done in the industry today for the most part. And it's a really great way of doing things. I totally do advocate for this workflow. But still, only distinct parts of the application are open source. Like, what if you want to actually see the source code of the full application itself, including how all the pieces are tied together? Well, that does exist out there. There are actually quite a few source available applications, and some of them are actually open source. Some of them are kind of like open source in the sense that the source is on GitHub, but the license is such that you might get sued if you actually use that. And on that note, there's a big variety of open source packages that I think are real open source, but they are a little bit like poisonous in the sense that if you use a little bit of that code in your application, then all of a sudden your whole application needs to be open sourced. So I think this is problematic because I want developers to be able to take my code and make private changes to it and be able to sell that as a separate application. So I want to ensure the freedom of the developers to do whatever they want with the code, and for them to be truly free to profit off of this code that I'm giving away, rather than worrying about the freedom of the code itself, which I don't think is nearly as much of a concern as making sure that the people can use the code in every way that they want to. So naturally, Zerve is properly open source. All of the different components are open source, and as a result, there's a bit of a cohesion. And as part of the implementation of Zerve, I've attempted to keep all of the sort of external dependencies as replaceable as possible. So the Zerve application is pretty self-contained, and it can be deployed on almost any server out there. There are a few services that we do depend on, like messaging and a few backend services, but in any case, you'll have confidence that you can deploy Zerve on a variety of different services for a long time into the future. And of course, Zerve is not just the one application, it has all these reusable components inside of it. And in that sense, the Zerve application itself is kind of like an example app that shows you how all of these different applications, how all these different components can be tied together in a cohesive and useful application. So to take this back to the original Zerve mission of making app creation more accessible, let's think about how your developers create that custom app in the first place. Because this can be a really tedious and painful process, and your developers have to make all sorts of decisions in order to figure out how to make this application. So, the Zerve application is open source, and what that means is that you can take it, you can copy it, and fork it, and then it becomes yours. All you have to do, according to the permissive license that we use with Zerve, is you have to rebrand it so that it has a different name from Zerve. But then right away, your application can do everything the Zerve application can do right out of the box. Now, of course, the first thing you're probably going to want to do is, delete some of the functionality that you don't need from the Zerve application. But then you can use the suite of existing packages to integrate them into your application as you need to add whatever features you need for your application in your company. So that is how Zerve is an application framework in my mind. It's already open source, and you can already follow this workflow, although I don't recommend it right now. Zerve is going to be a really amazing application framework, but right now it's mostly an application that I'm building that will eventually be useful in a much broader sense. So yeah, Zerve is an application framework, but it's not the only application framework out there. There's other open source app frameworks. So really, again, why is Zerve distinct? What is special about this project? Let's take a look at this process right here, because what's happening here is you are taking the Zerve application and it is not sufficient for you, so you are forking it and making your own application. At that point, by the way, the application is yours to maintain. It's your responsibility to make sure that it's up to date, make sure that it continues to work. And this can be really expensive. All of this stuff can be really expensive and can take a lot of time. So I really don't want this to be a burden. I feel like this fork is a sign that the Zerve app is failing you. And it should be able to do additional things for you that you somehow can't get out of it, and then you need to fork the application for yourself. So I want to take a step back and look at the Zerve application and think about what it actually should do. Like, due to my own personal limitations, Zerve is starting off as a very simple content management system for you to configure your app. But ultimately, I think it should be able to do so much more. I hope to add functionality like files and note-taking capabilities, so that way consumers have an alternative knowledge application that they can use as a personal knowledge base. I want business people and operators to have an alternative to spreadsheets that they can use to manage their business. If we really use our imaginations, we can equip Zerve with the right integrations and really powerful no-code features. And then Zerve can grow to support all kinds of different creatives and consumers. So finally, this is why I believe Zerve is actually, unironically, different from everything else in the world of software. Yes, it helps with your existing workflow by being a content management system that lets your non-technical people own the configuration and the content in your application. But it's not the only content management system out there. Yes, Zerve is an open source framework that helps your developers build their next application, and it can help them add features to your current application. But it's not the only way to build an app. Unlike every other content management system and app framework out there, Zerve is meant to grow to directly support businesses, educators, and creatives. And this is what I think is incredibly powerful. So you tell me, okay, I don't know, is my vision brilliant or is it unhinged? I'd love to hear from you in the comments and in the social medias. And if you've made it to this point in the video, I'm sure you want to see where this goes, this audacious effort. If it implodes on the launch pad, or hey, if we're going to the moon. So be sure to subscribe, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.